Hello, and thank you for joining us today. This is a really interesting topic that we're discussing with our panelists on the stage. I'm sure that you in the audience have some questions, so using the Web Summit app, you can submit your questions to us, and we'll try and get through some of them towards the end of this panel. So we've got three panelists here. Each of them works for a company that's doing something very, very difficult, all kind of vaguely in the medical space, I would say, in terms of enhancing the human body and what humans are capable of. So let's kind of introduce what each of you do. Emily, let's start with you. Let's hear about what your company is doing in the medical space.
Absolutely. So I work for Northwell Health. For those of you who aren't familiar with the American medical system, Northwell Health is the largest healthcare provider in New York State. Just to give you a rough sense of the size, about 1% of all the babies born in the US last year were born at a Northwell Health facility. So it's a massive, massive health system that not only has hospitals, but over 600 physician offices, lots of urgent care clinics, a medical school, and a research facility. And what this allows us to do is actually have a really fantastic testing ground for new technologies to explore the way they interact with some pretty diverse communities. As our CTO likes to say, we have great digital dirt to play in to start to understand how some of these technologies can be used and applied in the communities we serve.
That's great. Now, Leah, I know that your company is working on fertility, and our increased understanding of fertility is helping families all around the world both conceive and plan out how they want their families to evolve. Now, obviously, there's also it can also be a controversial topic, and I was just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about, the ethics of enhancing fertility and understanding fertility, and where we should be perhaps drawing the line.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you already mentioned babies. That's kind of what we do every day. So maybe just as a quick background, so Eva is a women's health company. So we really see ourselves as a women's health company. We are probably one of the leading digital health companies at the moment in that space. And I think your question towards where are the limits and what should we do in fertility, I think my main thought about that is we are still just very much scratching on the surface at the moment. It seems like we've advanced so much, but really, we are really not there yet. I think there's so much still that we should be doing because couples, and all of you in the audience will know someone who has trouble getting pregnant, and the process is terrible and it's terrifying. And even with all the different options that we now have we're not there yet. So I think it's almost too early right now to start already putting this into limits, because we really need to make the process better. But at the same time, obviously there are ethical questions. We need to set limits, and I think as a society we're starting to move towards that.
Fair enough. Now, Hugo, your company works at the kind of intersection of hardware and brain science. You have created a product which is not invasive, but I imagine you have worked a lot around, deciding what is the best way to solve the problem that your company has identified, and looked at both invasive and non-invasive methods. So I'd be really interested to hear from you what your approach is and how you decided on that.
Thank you. So the company I've founded is called Dream, and it has been founded after a neuroscience discovery. Basically, we observed with a team of neuroscientists that we were able to enhance the quality of deep sleep by triggering audio stimulation at specific moments of the brain activity. And so based on that, I looked at the sleep space. Sleep, as you might know, is a very important topic for us, for our health, productivity, and mood. But today you have 1/3 of the global population which is not sleeping well, which is a true problem because, it has, of course, an economic cost. Last year, for example, the United States lost $400 billion because of bad sleep. It has an impact on our health because poor sleep over many weeks, many months, many years could be correlated with neurodegenerative disease, cardiovascular disease, or mental disorders. And it's important for our day-to-day mood and well-being. And the thing is, when you look at the sleep space, what you see is it's completely absurd. So general practitioners are not really trained to sleep. So what they're going to do is they're going to prescribe sleeping pills, which are really harmful. You have a lot of articles correlating the usage of certain kind of sleeping pills with neurodegenerative disorders. Then you can look for sleep specialists. But the thing is, they are not enough to cover like 1/3 of the population. Maybe each of them are going to help, let's say, 100, 200, 300 people during their whole career. So it's not enough. And then if you look for alternative solutions, then you have like all the sleep technology solutions, consumer solutions that have been spreading a lot in the past years. But basically what is quite a problem right now is they are based on only tracking, right? So they are based on tracking of your movement at the night, and they claim to help you sleep better. So there is like some kind of fake marketing claims around sleep, but at the same time, it's an important topic. So we've built Dream based on the discovery and then the development of different neurotechnologies. So the core of our approach is to measure with accuracy the brain activity of the user at night. Because the only way to understand how you sleep is by measuring your brain activity, your heart activity, your breathing frequency. It is the only way to understand clearly and accurately how you sleep. So we started with that first. And then we developed some kind of tools and stimulation, non-invasive stimulation, to help our users, on falling asleep faster or enhance the quality of deep sleep or many things. So definitely the question of invasive versus non-invasive, in particular for the brain, is an important topic. Some projects, some transhumanist projects are really aiming at developing some kind of, cerebral implants, so things that you put inside your brain in order to enhance your cognitive functions, for example. But the thing is we are trying to plug two things that we are not mastering: the brain, that we don't know how it works today, and artificial intelligence. And the moment where you're trying to cross that limit, then you can basically expect a lot of risk. So it's always important to ask why you're doing that. And I think it's an important thing when you're developing on such kind of technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Emily, your company is working on certain invasive methods of treating illnesses. I imagine these are also things that you've had to think about while you guys have been developing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm glad you mentioned that you have to learn the underlying systems, right? Because at the end of the day, we can't fix what we don't understand. So one of the things that we've been actually looking at is trying to understand the role that inflammation plays in so many different disease processes, because inflammation inherently is something that is the body's own immune system acting up in one way or another. And so an area of research that we're really sort of at the forefront of is a field called bioelectronic medicine. And bioelectronic medicine is this understanding that if we can speak the language that the body speaks to its own systems, perhaps we can send a different message. So for instance, if the body's sending a signal to say, hey, immune system, attack all of the cells in your joints and therefore cause inflammation of arthritis, can we turn down that signal by sending an electrical current so that actually we can cure arthritis without adding a pill into the mix? And so bioelectronic medicine so far has shown a lot of promise. So here in Europe, we actually ran some clinical trials on a vagus nerve stimulator. So this is actually an implantable device, and this was actually something that goes on the vagus nerve, which is one of the main control centers for nerves coming out of the brainstem. And what we were able to show is that for people who have things like lupus, having a vagus nerve stimulator implanted and sending a signal to the immune system to essentially say, calm it down, allowed people who for their lives had been suffering from the effects of lupus to actually get off of the medication that they were on, because this vagus nerve stimulator was able to send the signal. So I'm 100% with both of you when you talk about needing to understand the body's mechanisms and do better with the body's own mechanisms before you add other things in. But I think part of that that need to understand comes with the ability, and tech can help provide that, to speak the body's language, right? And communicate with the body in certain ways, whether responding to signals it's sending out, or for us to be able to send signals in to either moderate our sleep patterns, our fertility patterns, or do something like adjust the way the immune system is responding to the body's own processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And all three of the products that you are in process of developing or have already developed are aimed at making people's lives better and helping consumers. But I was wondering if you thought at all or had any experience with consumers when it comes to their feelings about adopting these technologies. Obviously, we've seen massive growth in smartphone adoption all over the world. We've seen a slower growth in the adoption of wearables. Now we're talking about even more personalised wearables that are perhaps more niche, or even technologies that we might be building into our body. Have you kind of thought about this or had any experience in consumer reactions?
I mean, we certainly deal with this all of the time, but I think one of the important things to remember, I mean, you have to be in conversation with it, but you also have to understand the technologies that we already have in our bodies all of the time. These are a technology, and I can't go anywhere without them. We already use our phones and sleep with them by our bedside, so I don't think consumers inherently have a fear of working with or living with technologies, but I think we are approaching a certain point in time when the question of who controls that technology and what control do I as a user have over it is really becoming pretty stark, because some of these technologies, it might be very clear how I use my glasses and I can put them on and I can take them back off, but when something's implanted, where does my control start or stop? I think one of the other questions we have to ask, though, is what's the technology's end goal? Right? Because for those of us who are mostly healthy and who are able to lead our lives and get around the world with relative ease, it might be a choice whether or not we use these technologies. For some people, it's not a choice, right? It's a life or death situation as to whether or not the technology is going to be a part of how they live their lives. So we have to be careful sometimes and remember that the choice to or not to incorporate a technology into our lives oftentimes bespeaks our own level of ability to move through the world with or without it, right? And that we can't sort of look down on somebody because they actually need a wheelchair to get around, or they need some other piece of technology to help them see, or to help them have a baby, or to help them get to sleep at night. So again, it's really about what's the role the technology is playing for that person's life, and is it ultimately enriching their lives? And I think when you have that honest conversation with consumers, there's an honest understanding of the role that you, as the provider of the technology or provider of the healthcare, play with that person. And then that person feels empowered to take or not that technology into their lives for whatever it is that they need.
I mean, I can probably speak to that a little bit. I think so what we do is we've basically developed a sensor bracelet that helps women track their menstrual cycles. We understand the hormonal changes that they go through every cycle, and we help them really understand when are they fertile. We can detect that in real time, and we make their lives easier in getting there. And I think for us, it's really, as someone who started a startup, I mean, consumer adaptation is nothing else than have you actually developed a product that people actually like? And yes, I mean, there might be people that don't like it, but they're still forced to use it. That's not the case with our product. I think we're really enhancing women's options here, and we're really enhancing their convenience in a way by just giving them a simple tool to find out when can I get pregnant, and on that I'm going to try to optimize that. And I think from our side, I mean, we've seen massive consumer adoption, and it depends a little bit on the different markets because it's still every country deals very different with fertility. But I think especially in women's health, women are already quite used to making their own choices in women's health. I think we had to start making our own choices very, very early. It's something that, yes, we have a healthcare provider that influences that, but also we have our best friend, our sister, our mother. So we learn a lot from our little ecosystem. And I think that's why women are very used to, in this area of healthcare, to make their own choices and to inform themselves. And that is also why they're very happy to have something that empowers them. So we really see our device as something that empowers you, gives you additional information, and informs you personally, and doesn't go necessarily the healthcare route at the beginning. And I think that's something that speaks to a lot of women at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, all three of you, work in health-related fields or vaguely health-related fields. But do you think that there is an ethical difference between augmenting the body for medical reasons, for health reasons, and augmenting it for non-medical reasons?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. Because again, like the line could be blurred. If we talk about trisomy and the selection that we do around that, I think that people agree on doing that. But then when we talk about eugenism and then selecting some of the babies based on some other aspects, then it become problematic. I think that what is interesting with like the evolution of healthcare and all the innovation in this field is now people are not really forced to do things, but they want to do things, right? So now the healthcare is really transferring not to a system where you need to do stuff and a system where you pick what you want. And so I think what is especially important is to design solutions, innovation that people really care about using. And I trust people to make the right choice of what they want to do. If you take that at the collective level, right, at the international level and the population level, then I think that people will take the right choice. And it's hard when you think about regulating that, right? Because where do you put the limit? Who should say what is the limit? and how we can collectively agree on something is quite hard. But instead of a top-down approach, I'm more seeing like a bottom-up with people and general population, what they will adopt or not.
I mean, maybe one quick comment, and I would love to hear yours. I think the issue that we're having is what is a health problem to solve, and what is enhancing your body's abilities? And I mean, just again, I'm coming from the fertility space. One of the bigger questions is now, should insurance pay for fertility treatments or not? Is it something that you have chosen? Is it something you haven't chosen? I mean, I have a clear opinion about it, but I'm just saying, I think as a society right now, we just don't know really yet what is considered an enhancement and what is just considered health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is such a slippery slope between what is health and what isn't, and quite frankly, I think we in the healthcare industry have had an overly narrow view of what is considered health. I mean, is it health if it helps you run faster because you love to run and that's how you stay healthy? Is it health if it's a transgender surgery? I mean, where do you draw those lines? And so I think actually maybe a better question for us to ask, because I think at the core of that question is really one about what is too far, right? When have we crossed that territory into something that looks like Gattaca, into something that looks a little bit creepy? And I think when we ask those questions of ourselves, when we ask those questions as a society, ultimately what we're asking is a question about who do we want to be? What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to make better, and to what end, right? So when you ask about, designer babies and genetic manipulation, are we trying to make people who are free of disease, or are we trying to make people who all look the same? When we talk about enhancements to our own physical capabilities, are we talking about that because we want rich people to be able to be, skinnier or faster or stronger, or are we talking about it because we have an entire population that is developing some sort of allergic reaction to something that's in the water, and we actually want them all to be healthier? So I think all of these are actually larger questions about where do we point, and then to what end does our technology serve in getting us to that place? And that's actually a much broader question than any one technology that we're representing here could really speak to.
I'm wondering, and this is just, I would love to hear your thoughts about this. I'm wondering if it has something to do with equality. Because one of the reasons why we provide healthcare in most markets or most countries is because we want to provide ultimately equality, right? And so maybe we could define everything that is still kind of okay to do as everything that brings us to equality, and everything that brings us away from equality would be a negative thing. And honestly, I haven't thought about this for a really long time. I'm just, it comes up.
It's probably hard to find a good metric that could represent that, and to see all the potential, side effect or aspect that you could have, on the long run.
Yeah.
But I think what is really important is to not see that question only from a technological perspective, right? So tech is going to be a tool, but tech is not like the end question, and we need to bring around the table philosophers, people specialized in ethics, and it's not only a tech problem, right? Yeah. So that's why sometimes like the transhumanism point of view is a little bit scary, because they are a little bit like gurus. They talk about what potentially technology and science could lead, but without taking into account exactly like the end goal and the end objective of making people's life healthier, with a better quality, or even happier lives. Because if you think about creating only similar people, or enhance the cognitive possibilities and the IQ of everyone on Earth, then it could potentially lead to problems if you have equality everywhere and no diversity. So, and I think like the transhumanism or the guru of, for example, extending our brain capabilities are not really answering that question.
I'm wondering though, because I'm sorry that I'm cutting you off here, because yes, I mean, I think we have to bring much more people to this conversation, and it's really important that not tech takes that decision. But at the end, if tech and also pharma and medtech is providing the solution, we have to take the responsibility on figuring out what we are creating, right? And I think it's on us, because sometimes an individual human being will do something that as a whole for society is harmful, and we cannot be the ones that provide those solutions.
Absolutely. I think tech at its core asks the questions, can we do something? But we never ask ourselves, should we do something? Right? And just because you can do it doesn't necessarily mean you should do it. So how do you get those philosophers at the table with us, right? This can't be something where we as tech companies just wait and sort of put something in market and then go, oops, and then have everybody come join us, right? We have to have them embedded with us in our company and in our cultures.
You can build some kind of, ethical committees.
Yeah.
It's like very well known for big companies, but for more growing and recent companies, I think it's just something interesting. And then you have the regulatory aspect, right? Yeah. So you have like the health authorities that could play a role, but the problem is the difference between the countries. and how you make sure you can align everything, because then if China is allowing particular things that are not really allowed in United States, then you can potentially see difference and pressure put on countries. So the question also is what kind of high-level policy, what kind of high-level institution could potentially also play a role on that. But definitely, like, companies should probably include some kind of ethical committee around the table.
Yeah, it feels like this is really a question about value systems across the whole of society, globally and also individually as countries. If we are developing, if we are working towards equality, as you suggested, Leah, then that seems like a great value to choose. But another country could easily say, well, our end goal is to develop humans as bioweapons. In which case, then we start to have a problem. But regardless of the values that we have as society, whenever you introduce new tech, as you pointed out, there are very specific tech risks as well that come with that. Data privacy, for example. And I was wondering, what are some of the risks that you have all thought about when you've been developing your technologies, and how have you thought about mitigating them best?
Well, for us in the US, we are hyper-regulated with regards to healthcare data and how it can and can't be shared. So we have, I also work with financial data sometimes, and quite frankly, the financial data rules are way less than what we have around our health data rules. So that standard is one that we continue to use. Right now, one of the things we are grappling with is actually the implications of GDPR and understanding what will that mean in terms of how it translates to the US. So we have a couple states already taking some universal data privacy rules into their own hands. How do we respond to that, right? Because as a healthcare company, we have an obligation to remember things you tell us, but you as an individual might want to have the right to be forgotten. What's that about in terms of how we negotiate that access to the data, that right to change, delete, et cetera, of the data? So that's something that we're definitely grappling with right now.
So you have data, which is, I think, really, really important. So we are like a European-based company, so we have gone through like GDPR. You have also, I think, like a more high-level transparency on how you communicate to people around health. So, with this kind of, digital health era and some kind of companies which are not going through the traditional medical pathway, it can lead to a lot of really false promise. And on health, it's particularly important. What we have seen in the wearable space is a lot of false claim. You can improve your sleep by wearing a wristband around your wrist. No, that's not true. You have nothing proving that. So I think that it's especially important to say what you're doing, what you're not doing, to have some kind of clinical validation. So of course, not everyone wants to go through the FDA or CE marking in Europe, because CE marking in Europe is just a hell, right? And we are looking at it, so we know that. But I think transparency is the key for this kind of topics.
Now, I'm afraid we are out of time, but I just wanted to give you one last thing so that we can leave the audience with something exciting and positive to go away with. So quick question for each of you. What is the coolest or most exciting use case that you can think of for bionic technology?
I'm a little biased, but I think bioelectronic medicine is absolutely incredible. For those who are interested, the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research, Dr. Kevin Tracy, is where you can understand the scientific details of exactly how we speak to the different electronic pathways. But I think it's incredible, the idea that we could hack the body's own electrical system to be in conversation with the body and really be able to regulate ourselves and not need pharmaceuticals at all. I think that is an incredibly promising area of medicine, so I'm really excited about that potential.
For me personally, I think it's what we're working on right now. I think we need to find a solution to not make pregnancy dangerous anymore, and we're working on that and trying to solve it. We need to find better non-hormonal birth control solutions. We finally need to find solutions for women during menopause, which is something that's completely not solved. There's so much blank space in our space that I can't even begin to think outside of it, because I see all the issues that I have right in front of me.
I personally think that sleep space and neurotechnology space is an interesting world. We can't really explain what we have between our ears, so we're looking at space exploration and stuff like that, but it's probably one of the biggest mysteries, and it's probably at the origin of everything that we have built. So I believe that non-invasive neurotechnologies could bring some really interesting, if they go at scale, they can bring some really interesting data to understand and model the human brain. And sleep, obviously, for me, is a threshold that we have. So we can build everything we want to improve our productivity and well-being during the day. If we don't sleep well, we'll always be given a threshold in terms of what we can do. So I mean, this is one thing first that we should solve. Of course, I'm biased, but then the brain is obviously one very interesting word.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm so sorry we didn't get time to get to any of your questions, but please give a big round of applause to our panelists.